I love taking Uber. I take Uber, you meet all sorts of interesting people, and anytime I sense that somebody's has just come to Canada or they made that move to Canada, they took their family across the world, I often say, what brought you here? And often I would say the majority of the time they said healthcare. Healthcare, the fact that I can get access to a doctor, the fact that I don't have to, I can sleep with peace at night knowing that my family has that. And I wonder sometimes how Canadians that have been here, we might take it for granted versus people that are coming here going, this is like this magic wand that people have provided us. It's been around for 50 years. Now, if you listen to political rhetoric or reality, which is math, language of the universe, somewhere between that, the system's, it's either broke or bruised or it's being battered. And you think 50 years ago when we started, the healthcare we gave out was mostly acute illness and acute injury, and it was this great partnership between pharmacy and hospitals and doctors. But as our population's aging rapidly, it's now becoming very much chronic illnesses, the diabetes, the dementia, chronic lung disease. And it's a whole different headwinds that are hitting us. With mission critical decisions we got to make, and we're dealing with federal government and 10 provinces and 3 territories. We've got dealing with countless new touch points that are coming on. And I think the answer is going to be, if we really look at the patient and truly can put them in the center, take away our silos and our need to hold on to cement, just look at this patient-centric and realize that what they're going to be screaming for and are screaming for is really 2 words. They want more and less. They want more access, they want more information, more transparency, more authenticity. They want to know more of where they are on this path when they get diagnosed. They want to have less friction and less effort because especially this new generation is coming along. This mobile phone is their magic wand. So they're really demanding more and less at a time when I think the entire industry is going to be challenged to give more for less. And if we start losing our borrowing capacity as governments, we start our interest rates go up, it might be much less. So there's a lot to be dealing with. And today, over the next day and a half, we're talking pharmacy, and we're talking about the relevancy of pharmacy within this ecosystem. And if you look at the 5 points that neighborhood pharmacies put out in their strategic plank, and talking about billions of dollars we can take off the table if we start making smarter decisions in terms of what drugs we dispense. And we could take millions of patient visits away from doctors and bring them in. We could be part of the solutions with long home care. And we can be part of, if there's a pandemic, we can be the first point of defense. Lots of big, rich ideas on how our industry can play a role of high relevance to the patient that's in the center, and the fact is, as an ecosystem, we have to carve out real savings. We really have to stop with the rhetoric and get down to the reality. So the next hour and a half, we've got an interesting session. We're going to start off with Cantor Retail is going to come up and do about a keynote, and they're going to draw on Brian Owens come up from the States. He's in charge of Drug Channel. He's going to do a deep dive into what's going on in the States, what's sticky, what's happening, what it's making. And Robin Shirk, who runs the Canadian operation in Insights, is also going to share her point of view. I think I'm going to ask them a couple of questions, and then we're going to invite in 3 member organizations, and we're going to continue to drill down on this sense of relevance. What's the rudder we can grab as an organization going forward? How can we take steps forward when those headwinds are pushing us back? Please welcome Robin and Brian. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. You guys hear me okay? All right, so thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for having us. We're from Kantar Consulting, formerly known as Kantar Retail, and what we're going to do for the next, call it 45 minutes, is take you through the retailization of health and wellness with some examples specifically related to Canada, and Robin's going to do that in part of her section. So before we start, I think what's important, and if you think about a lot of the trends and a lot of the topics that have already been set up today, what's important to understand is we're going through a shift right now, and it's not just in the States, it's not just in Canada, it's globally. The model is broken. Healthcare is broken. The cost of care is high everywhere. As a result, we're moving to a consumer-driven model. It's happening slowly. You just talked about, Canadian healthcare has been around for 50 years, yet it still has flaws. Prescriptions is not part of the program. So as we're dealing with a more consumer-driven, patient-first, consumer-first model, retail is going to increasingly be the place. So all the folks who work in the pharmacy, retail increasingly is going to be a place where people are expecting care. Expecting care. It's important to highlight. And if we think about what that looks like, globally, the way we think about the individual, the way we think about how the patient experience is changing. The key stakeholders aren't just the individual anymore. It's not just about the pill. It's not just about the injection. It's also how this individual is caring for a cohort of people. And we talk about younger generations. We call it millennials and centennials. So centennials are those folks who are 0 to 19 years old. These younger generations have more responsibility now, not only to care for themselves, but also for aging parents. But increasingly, family is being redefined as well. So it could be your neighbor. It could be folks who are a part of your social media profile. So we have to think completely differently about how we engage these folks, these patients, how we traditionally call them right now. Because we know from our data that folks are looking at their community, their family, a lot differently. We also know that consumers are looking for solutions. We tease the concept of digital technology. If you read the book, we talk about that here. All right? 1 in 20 Google searches are for health. People are looking for solutions. 1 in 20. All right, so if you think about digital disruption, you think about what's going on in the States right now, when everyone is going gaga right now with Amazon going into healthcare, it's because of that, because people are going online. There's a lot of reasons behind that 1 in 20. Safe place, dumb questions, no time. There's a lot of layers to this 1 in 20. But it's important for everyone in this room who has a very traditional way of thinking about healthcare, we have to get with a new program. In a consumer-driven environment, technology matters, and they're looking for solutions. So how do we partner? That's a critical takeaway there. We also know the future is here. And for folks who, talking with Robin about specific Canadian insights and the nuances in this market versus in the US, all I can say is this past week has been a roller coaster. Walmart, Humana, Walmart acquiring PillPack, CVS, Aetna, Express Scripts. There's a lot of commotion going on right now, consolidation going on right now, because the new model is changing. Amazon's playing already in healthcare, whether it's with Cerner, and for folks in the audience who aren't familiar, the AWS part of the Amazon ecosystem. Robin has educated me, because she's one of our digital experts. Amazon is not a retailer first, they're a technology company first. Right? One of the reasons they're able to do the things that they're doing from a retail standpoint and with Prime is that they have a portfolio. Very similar to how United Healthcare works in the US. That's the model everyone is chasing after. So if you think about what Amazon's doing with Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan, it's a way to be outcome focused. They don't get into this industry to play by the rules. They dictate the rules. So how we're all comfortable right now with healthcare, with Amazon, and the people that are part of that process to think through these critical solutions which are going to affect everyone globally, it's about outcome-based care without the profit motivation. Because in the US right now, it's a siloed approach on purpose. And there's not a PR campaign against it. It's okay to be a capitalist in this space. But who's left behind? The consumer, the patient, families. Amazon's here to change the rules. So it's important for us to understand that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Globally, we take a step back. Part of our job at Kantar Consulting is to take a step back and really assess and do forecasts in the retail pharmacy landscape. So I'm a drug channel expert. I spend a lot of time calling on CVS, carrying the bag, trying to sell, get SKUs in on the shelf, but increasingly understanding what those new touch points are to engage that shopper. And when we look globally, Canada is right up there in the top 3 markets. Japan's there because they have an aging population. But if you think about developed countries, the US and Canada, very different systems, but yet in terms of the cost of care and dispensing drugs, in the top 5 globally. We have a responsibility. We heard earlier about the global responsibility with Ebola. There's no mistake there in terms of the research and development that are happening in both these geographies. We have to work better together in terms of solving these bigger macro issues. Because hypertension is not a US only issue. Diabetes is not a US only issue. It's a global issue. It's a global issue. And as we look globally, there are similarities in terms of how developing countries address healthcare. We have a model here in terms of the prescriber dominates and the pharmacy evolution. All I have to say is as we move in this direction, services becomes a bigger component in terms of delivery of health. I did some store walks before we had this presentation here. I went to Infinity Health System across the street near the Delta Hotel. And what I thought was so amazing was, although it's a local pharmacy, a local health system, that they had massage services next to rehabilitation services all in one big offering. That's what I'm talking about. You cannot operate in silos, because engaging the shopper when it comes to their personal health, it's about empowering, not dictating to them. This gives the shopper and the individual choice. That's the responsibility, and we have to think differently, and we have to think differently about partnership. With Amazon coming into this space, disrupting it, completely disrupting it, the role of services at retail matters because we know we have a shortage of primary care physicians. That's not just a Canadian issue, that's not a US issue, that's a global issue. People aren't in school. People aren't focusing on this. I love to hear that folks are like 60% of the Canadian pharmacists are females. I think that's great. I think that's a diversity of thought, approach, caregiving, all of that. There's a lot in there. But in the US, that's not necessarily the same ratio. And I know globally that's a challenge as well. Every geography has a different challenge. If you're talking about China, there's not even the physical infrastructure to deliver care. That's why everything is starting online with Alibaba Health, as an example of that. But it's important to appreciate as geographies evolve, the role of services matters more, but also the role of products too. And I use the example of Superpharma in Israel. So from a lot of my travels globally, when I walk into that store, although I do admire a lot of the pharmacy in this country as well, but when I walk into this store in Poland in particular, this is what these photos have come from, I really appreciate the blending of health, beauty, wellness, service all together. And I feel like there's a lot for us to learn, looking outside of our borders when it comes to the delivery of care, and more important, how people communicate. Tone matters. Wait times are a challenge in this country, it's a challenge in our country as well in order to get delivery of care. One thing I noticed in this store, you see, wait times and going to the pharmacist, register, they're communicating how long it's going to take because when it's a consumer-driven model, people are doing trade-offs. How much time it takes me to wait in this line, less time to spend with my family, less time to do work. When we're dealing with a consumer-driven model, the rules are different. So if you're a pharmacist, your relationship with the front store manager has to change. Your interaction has to change. You both understand different flow patterns, traffic. We have to work better together, both with the retailer as well as the manufacturer in this room, working with the pharmacist as well as the retailer. Pharmacy disruption. So one of the questions I was asked was, what's going on with CVS and Aetna? So there's a quick framework the way we look at this. Cost. One of the motivations behind CVS and Aetna coming together, and just for folks in the audience to understand, CVS has been working with Aetna for a long time. This is not something that just came out of nowhere. The two companies coming together is new news, but the big driver is we know from a branding standpoint, a marketing standpoint, the cost of care in the US is out of control. Out-of-pocket expenses are in the double digits. So if you think about if I work for Kantar Consulting, my out-of-pocket expense to receive care used to be $500 and it's now $1,500. People feel that. That's money coming out of my pocket before I even receive care. I have to have a $1,500 cash outlay. When consumers are feeling that pinch, they're going to start looking at products differently, retailers differently, trade-offs in their own family. CVS recognized that. They changed their name to CVS Health for a reason. And why adding insurance into the mix allows them to give them a leg up to deliver a different kind of value proposition to their shopper as well as their patient. Think about adherence, getting people to behave the way it's prescribed. Understanding that with this offering, with insurance in there, close your eyes and envision a world where the underserved population who I don't have care walks into a store, CVS saying, hey, look, we know that you're sick. If you behave differently, we're going to track your extra card data. Oh, by the way, we have this HIPAA law. Opt out of that. If you opt out of that, maybe your insurance premium is cheaper next year. That's the future, where the front store as well as the pharmacy works together. That's the disruption you think about with the Prime member and the Amazon ecosystem. With younger generations being part of this equation, the whole concept of privacy is very different between a boomer, a senior, a Gen Xer. And when you're younger, privacy, you don't care. If you're sharing everything on Facebook and Instagram, what's one more place to let everyone know your business? So the whole concept of loyalty is going to change, but it's also about empowering different behavior. Primary care, the doctor, healthcare professional, your annual physical, all this is going to change in the ecosystem where insurance, your coverage is now part of the equation. So this is an advantage for a CVS-Aetna marriage. They can reinvent the front store. They've already got out of tobacco. They've already made a pretty bold statement when it comes to beauty in the Me Too movement. So they're able to be on trend in terms of no more airbrushing. They're making statements. In the US right now, people are making statements. It's in politics, everywhere, people are making statements because the consumer is resonating with that. So the whole role of the front store in a health-first organization is completely different. It's reinventing completely. So CVS sees an opportunity to get credit for that, real estate. There's an advantage there. Transparency, and I think this is key. Where the model fails is that in how health is delivered right now, there isn't a lot of transparency. In the profit-first model, it's on purpose not to be transparent. Because you can't show everyone how you make money because it will turn people off. In this model, transparency, visibility, the ability for folks who understand, oh my God, I only have $100 in my pocket right now. Where do I spend that money? If I only make $50,000 a year for my family, where do I spend that money? CVS now has the ability to help that shopper make those decisions. It's a big reason why Walmart is now playing in the same game with Humana. 80% of Humana's revenue comes from Medicaid and Medicare Advantage, which is older shoppers, 65 plus, who are coming into the Walmart stores already. Now they have an ability now to help them understand the trade-offs of their spend and also get credit for everything else. All the 22,000 SKUs that are in that store now have a different strategic purpose for that shopper. That's why you're seeing a lot of these moves. It's not about units per store per week, it's about loyalty. And last is access. With the Affordable Care Act, with a lot of the interventions that are happening in the US right now, they're all great. You guys have been doing it for 50 years, again, credit back. But at the end of the day, there's still people who are left behind. And frankly, those are the people that need care the most, the underserved populations. This program, this merger, forming, is forcing other folks to do the same thing in terms of their consolidation, to be more vertically integrated. And it also expands access to those underserved populations of people. By having an ability, again, speculation, to be able to walk up to one of the 10,000 CVS stores, or in a Target, because there are also CVS stores or in Target pharmacies, they now have an ability to be able to get care like they get Oreo cookies. It's a commodity now. We know it's not, but the way it's going to be framed and branded to underserved population, there's an opportunity there. Why you see Walmart? Where is the motivation? We need to help those underserved populations be well so the municipal cost associated with all taxpayers goes down. That's the challenge. That's the responsibility. Publicly, they say that. You know, the proof is in the pudding, because there's a lot of marketing going on right now. You know, time will tell whether or not folks are really focused on an outcome-based model. We also have this acronym called FLOAN. Fresh, local, organic, natural, and health. Our prediction at Kantar Consulting is that, you know, between now and 2020, that's not that far away, you know, 25 to 50% of all major supplier or retail innovation will have some component of that. So when we're coaching and we're educating and we're partnering with folks on our jobs, we're making sure they're aware of that, because you're already seeing it show up in a lot of the retail environment right now. These are the terms, these are the authentic words that shoppers are looking for to pay that premium for. In a world where there's a huge trade down, these are the things that people trade up for. We also understand we can't not talk about medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. It's happening in the US as well. I'm from Massachusetts. You know, recreational marijuana passed. However, from a regulatory standpoint, it's July right now in terms of when it's actually going to be rolled out. But what we know from some quick studies from Clara Research in the US is what's interesting is not just about people getting high, it's about people are using this as alternative medicine. You know, and folks who do use it for pain and for other uses are using prescriptions less. So if that's happening, we have to rethink, one, why are they doing that? And two, what's the share of wallet impact? Because there's less money to spend on other things. Because the stat here, and again, this is coming from one of the dispensaries in San Francisco, is that personal care, alcohol, and tobacco combined, the medical marijuana consumer is spending close to, I think it's more on medical marijuana than on those three categories combined. This is alcohol and tobacco, chronic purchases. This is something we all have to take into consideration in the future, whether people are using it for recreational purposes or for medicinal purposes. It's a share of wallet impact. So if you think you don't play in this space, it's going to impact you because your consumer or somebody in your store is going to be choosing this over something in your store. We also know that health and wellness are two separate trip missions. So this is something I think for a lot of folks in the room could be, blow your mind. When we look at our shopper data, we're seeing that shoppers we ask the question to them about being well versus about being healthy, there's different responses. So my education back out to this audience is, if you're really about wellness, does your product help people laugh? Because 70% of shoppers associate being well with laughing. We have to look differently about the consumer, we have to engage them differently, and we have to meet them where they're at. Because sick care is a whole different mindset. Empowering people to be well needs to be fun, needs to be engaging, needs to be easier. The system as it exists right now, I don't care what geography you're in, it's difficult to see the trade-offs of the decisions that people make. And when we look at Canada, thank you, Robin, for being able to data mine this and ask the right questions, the consumer and the profile is a little bit different. It's more about being well. US, it's more, I would say, skews more sick care, more episodic, more reactionary, cold and flu season. We've had vaccine and flu shots for a very, very long time, and they're free in some situations, yet people still don't take them. 10% of the population takes vaccines, immunizations in the US. It's very, very low. And even if you take a flu shot, you still can get sick. It happened to me. So it turns you off from trying to do it the next year. And the global response to sick care and self-care is different strategies. So this is a European example that I use when I'm traveling. If you think about Boots, which is part of Walgreens Boots Alliance, versus Superdrug, versus part of the Rossmann Group, it's very different. Retailers are playing to their strengths, and their communication is very, very different. I don't think it's any different here. But it's important to understand what the motivation behind the retailer is, so how your brand or service fits into that ecosystem matters, because everyone's trying to solve a different trip mission. And when we start thinking about health and wellness holistically, it's important for all of us to look at the data a little bit differently. So, key takeaways, where we're headed, before I hand it off to Robin here to take all this and make it more Canadian-centric. Number one, more self-care services. Framework to think about, it's all about conversion. So think about converting that shopper differently. By having services, you're gonna have another opportunity to have another conversation and convert that shopper, whether they're buying a good or another offering that you're trying to put out there from a curation standpoint. Number two, more digital partnerships. 1 in 20 Google searches, people are looking for healthcare information. All right? It's about outcomes. In an environment which is virtual, there's more opportunity to have a conversation, engage, educate, and bring other people into the party. That's important for all of us to consider, whether you're a retailer or you're a supplier, or you're on the PBM side. It's all about coming together at this point. Number three, more authentic transparency. It's about loyalty. So if you have a loyalty card, you're partnered with a loyalty card, it's important to think about how authentic you are right now with your shopper. What do you stand for matters now. In a world where you can get information anywhere, and you're looking for validation from your friends and family, if you're not authentic, people will figure that out pretty freaking quickly. So it's important for us all to make sure when we have that first conversation, it's authentic and it's truthful. Because it's proven, at least in our country, even if you're that way and flawed, you can still be president of the United States. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Sorry. Number four, more niche challenger brands. The rise of new premium, Flan, fresh, local, organic, natural, and healthy is driving that. It's all about innovation. Cannabis falls into that, a consumer-driven category. It's been around for a long time. And now people are finally getting with the program because there's a lot of different purposes for it. But at the same time, I applaud regulatory folks who are understanding that pharmacists need to be first when it comes to that. Because when you start combining different drugs in people's DNA, it's not consistent. You can't scale this. And we have to think about children and how people are starting to adopt that. And number five, more points of distribution. There's more places to buy, there's more places to inform, there's more places to engage. So this is where we're headed. Now I'm going to transition it over to Robin. She's going to give an illustration of how this is playing out in this market.
And good afternoon, everyone. So Brian did a great job of setting up the landscape. What are the big themes, the big shifts that we're seeing happen out there? My job is to bring this home for us. Say, how does this relate to our market? Where do we see it going here? And really, what does this mean for me today? Whether I'm a pharmacist or I sell products in the pharmacy. And so to do this, I'm going to start out by just making sure to level set a little bit, just in terms of where the landscape's at, before going through those 5 elements that Brian just talked about and applying them to the market. So to start off this conversation, where are we at today? And don't worry, this will be quick. This is just making sure we're all on the same page. But from the shopper point of view, there's 3 elements that we really need to consider. The first is that we're aging. I think many of us have seen those statistics from Stats Canada that says there's now more folks over the age of 65 in this country than under the age of 15. And this shift or this trend is expected to accelerate as boomers continue to age. The second consumer piece to consider is debt. As a country, or as folks, we owe about $1.70 for every dollar we have in take-home income. And seniors are also increasing their debt. We've seen that rise over the last 10 years. This is not just a Gen Y issue. So what this means is we're going to become more concerned about our spending and our discretionary spending over time. And the third piece that we need to consider when we look at the shopper today is just the greater diversity that we have. We know that 1 in 5 folks in this country weren't born here. And when you look at where they're from, roughly 60% of recent immigrants are from various Asian countries. What this means is we have a different orientation. We might be used to different types of medicines or different types of practices than we would conventionally consider. So that's the current shopper landscape. When you look at the system as a whole, I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room that costs are rising. Last year, overall, healthcare costs increased about double the rate of inflation. This type of increase is, on track to continue to grow. And then the other piece we've already mentioned earlier today is this notion of doctor shortages, where anywhere between 6% and 15% of Canadians say they can't find a family doctor. And as more folks age, so they need more care more often, that shortage, it looks like it's going to increase. And then for us, in the pharmacy business, we're continuing to experience regulatory pressures as well. You can think about this in terms of caps on what we can charge for generic medicines, for instance. Just one example. But this idea of continued pressure on our own top-line revenues. So that's it for today. But where are we headed tomorrow? Well, when you take all these considerations of where we're at, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect that costs are going to go up. Costs in terms of time and wait time, but also costs in terms of money, what we need to spend out of pocket for these chronic conditions that we're going to likely continue to experience. Then the second piece of this is, as Canadians have different benchmarks or different spending considerations, they're going to be looking to alternatives for care as well. That could be natural home remedies, or it could be Eastern medicines that we're not as familiar with here domestically. And as consumers are more willing to look for various alternatives for their care, we're going to see more openness towards devices over time as well, helping adherence or monitoring, helping caregivers take care of their parents as well. We're going to see that increase in healthcare IT across a number of spectrum. And then the last piece is, what does this mean for us? And I think this is a theme that we've seen throughout today, but this idea that the role of the pharmacy and the role of the retailer in this environment is going to continue to diversify and expand as folks look for solutions that mitigate both time and cost for them. Okay, so that's a quick level setting of where we're at here. But how does this relate to those 5 overarching themes that Brian introduced a minute ago? So let's start with the first one that he mentioned, this idea of more self-care and the opportunity for greater conversion. I think one easy and tangible example of this is just the elevation, if I can speak, of events. And a great example of this is actually from the US and looking at Walmart stores there. And I don't know if anyone in this room has been into one of their quarterly wellness days. If not, their next one's April 21st, so you can make a road trip. But when you look at these events, they're impressive because they're really pretty holistic. They have these booths set up with these balloons that you can see kind of cueing shoppers to this part of the store. They give out samples. They teach you about their private labels. They're done in association with different healthcare groups, for instance, the American Diabetes Association, to really help the pharmacist get to know the community and help position themselves as not only a resource in terms of their expertise, but in terms of the products and solution and ongoing care they can offer shoppers. So this idea of elevating these events, I think, is something there's opportunity to certainly lean in more on. But the other piece, too, is just how are these things going to evolve? With Walmart, for instance, we've seen them start to add more of a digital component. For instance, I can get mobile alerts to tell me when the next event is going to be, to make sure I don't miss out on that opportunity to engage with my pharmacist and have some routine diagnostics done. As we look forward, I expect to see more local connections as well, and getting more in tune with some more visceral issues. So this is an example from a pharmacy in the US, where one of the services they're featuring is actually rehabilitation care, addiction treatment. And I know this idea might sound a little bit, okay, I'm not sure we can do that today kind of thing. But when we look forward, this is absolutely the direction I see it going, first of all. And secondly, there are other local concerns or local areas that our shoppers might be really wanting services from us that we can offer. Helping to advise them on natural products, for instance, and how to navigate this space. I want to have a more sustainable and green lifestyle, but I don't know how to do this with my OTC items. This kind of idea of how do I have services that are elevated, more holistic across the store, and more locally relevant to the concerns of my community. So the question for us then, in this section, is are we truly leaning in to our opportunity to provide events to shoppers? To use this as a connection point, not only to drive traffic and increase our patient connection, but also to elevate our total store in what we're able to offer. So that's the first element. Now, the second element was about this idea of digital partnerships and to improve outcomes. And as I look at this, I think part of this we get. Our It's Ready mobile alerts, for instance, or electronic records that make sure we don't have medications that, that could hurt us or contradict things. But this idea goes much further than that as well. And that's the point that I really want to make sure to bring home here. So when we look at digital, it's more than just the electronic health records and devices, which is certainly very important, but it applies to things like fulfillment as well. So to bring this to life for you, there's this pharmacy in the US, Bartell Drugs, and they partnered with Amazon Prime Now. And so you can have 1-hour delivery of your OTC items and various front-end pharmacy items to your home. So for instance, when you wake up with a massive head cold, you don't even have to get out of bed anymore to have your pharmacy serve you. You can say, Alexa, get me my cold medicine and tissues, and I can have it arrive at my front door by the time I roll out of bed and get out of the shower. That's a pharmacy connection. And this might sound a little bit futuristic, even though it's happening in the US right now. But I do see this right around the corner for Canada. And the example of this is the fact that Instacart came here just this past winter in partnership with Loblaw. And we know that Loblaw owns Shoppers Drug Mart. And I think it's a matter of time till Shoppers Drug Mart starts to introduce similar on-demand delivery services. So it's using digital to expand our reach and how we can serve shoppers in a way that we just couldn't otherwise. Bringing that convenience 2.0 to the box. And then in addition to fulfillment, there's also what I'll call the connection to marketing and the connection to, I'll call it improving outcomes from a health and wellness standpoint, or the wellness side of that. So an illustration here is looking at what Walgreens and their loyalty program, Balance Rewards, did with Johnson & Johnson and their 7-minute workout app. Whereas as you complete different workout routines, and no one wants to watch me do that, especially not right now, but by the end of this 7-minute workout, you actually earn loyalty points that you can redeem at Walgreens. It connects the promotional offer to my behaviors and to improving my own health and wellness, to helping me reach my goals. So how could we connect our promotions as well to improving various patient outcomes, whether it's maintaining certain diets, maintaining certain physio regimes, or even just the basic of going for extra walks during the week. But this idea of connecting that health message to promotions in a way that digital enables us, in a way we can never do before, is certainly something that deserves to be explored more. And I think that's an undertapped opportunity in Canada today. So this is to bottom line, this digital partnership idea. It's recognizing just how expansive and just how holistic our digital connections can be, and making sure that we're focusing on the broad range of digital touch points we can be using to influence and elevate our patients' outcomes. Okay, so the third piece of this idea of greater authenticity and transparency to drive loyalty with our shoppers. As Brian mentioned, if you're not being authentic to your message, shoppers are going to know immediately, and you lose credibility and potentially trust in that context. So here we are seeing some drugstores really lean in. And I think a good example of this is CVS. Of their own volition, they decided to stop selling cigarettes, as opposed to having it be a regulation forced on them. And as they did that, they found total cigarette sales in the states where they did this, in the 13 states, went down by 1%. So they could reasonably tell the public that they helped reduce the amount of cigarettes that people were smoking. But they've taken it one step further as well, as Brian alluded to. This idea of saying, if we're going to focus on beauty and helping people feel confident in themselves, we shouldn't be digitally altering our beauty pictures, our models. We should make a more inclusive message that doesn't look quite so aspirational. It looks more real, something that we can relate to. And so they've announced that they're no longer going to be altering their beauty images in their store. And when we think about this, we have to ask this of ourselves too. What do our shoppers view us as standing for? Whether it's serving aging shoppers, supporting that beauty care regime, standing for health, natural, and whichever it is they say we stand for, does this message from the pharmacy truly resonate across the box? I think of the types of snack foods we feature, for instance. I think of how we position our beauty offer. Is it inclusive of the aging Canadian? We know more of us are. But this idea of, are we truly being authentic to that brand message and that community connection we have to the total front end, I think is going to be a pressure or a differentiation point that we can be using to drive our position. It's something I haven't seen as much of in Canada today, but as we look forward, I think we certainly see this demand from shoppers to have that sense of authenticity, to drive that true connection, to say, you know what, we are living the message that we preach. We're walking the talk. Okay, so that's the third area. What's the fourth area here? This kind of dovetails into it, and this is this idea of niche premium products and the new innovation that we're seeing come out in the market. Or as Brian told us, that acronym was FLOWN, which is delightful. It sounds like someone's spitting at you. But it's this idea of this natural wellness, local, these types of products. And I think a good example of a retailer leaning in here, or a pharmacy leaning in here, is actually Rexall. I think their acquisition of Well.ca, just in the past year, yes, it gave them certainly some digital expertise and e-commerce capabilities, but it also gave them access to an understanding of the natural and wellness space. When you look on Well.ca, they have this Badgers sunscreen. I thought badgers were nocturnal. I didn't know they had anything to do with the sun. But apparently, they have a very nice sunscreen brand. And when I see that, I think, well, maybe that has less chemicals. Maybe that's better for me to use on my kid's skin. I don't know what else is being absorbed there. Kind of want to talk to my pharmacist and find out, is this going to be an effective product or not? But it certainly aligns with my, my personal interests of trying to use less chemicals and be more natural. So recognizing that there's this shift in product demand from consumers, but we could certainly play a role in advising this. But it doesn't only have to be the natural and green products. There's other ways to do this too. Another example from Rexall is in their private label, both in how they're messaging and positioning this item here. Where when you look at the text there on the top, it says, crafted to help you. I see that, I think of a hipster cocktail drink, personally crafted for me. But it's for their personal care items. And in this case here, their shampoo, which is literally and figuratively positioned above the national brand, with their lavender and shea butter shampoos and conditioners. It just sounds more authentic. It sounds more, more desirable. But in addition to that type of product, we're also seeing the use of local or community connection items as well. A classic example of this is Buckley's OTC items. This is a good old Canadian brand that has the audacity to tell me that it tastes awful, but it's going to work. Like, I don't know any other product that can get away with telling me it tastes awful, but that's okay. But this idea that they can be so honest, almost this Canadian authenticity, that they get away with it. And we actually find it endearing, and it creates that connection. But in addition to elevating local products, we're also seeing more foreign products be elevated as well. So this example on the far right-hand side of the screen from the Superstore, where this is a very popular skincare brand in China and Taiwan, is being featured here in both English and Chinese. So if I'm a new Canadian or a folk that just identifies with multiple communities, this tells me the retailer and this beauty department gets me. It creates a connection in a way that other items wouldn't. So what's the point here when I talk about all this niche premium product stuff? I think the point I'm trying to reiterate here is, are we on autopilot when we think of our front end, when we think of our beauty and our personal care and our health items? Are we looking at past sales data to decide what we're going to focus on? Or are we really trying to think through how are Canadians' demands shifting? What are the new categories and the new spaces that we're not in right now that we need to be, because their demands are there? And this is particularly important as we look at aging shoppers as well. I think a great example of a format here that is developed by Shoppers Drug Mart is the Wellwise store that they launched in the past year. And if you haven't had a chance to visit this store already, I would recommend it. It's in Toronto, so there's no reason not to visit it over the next few days. But it shows them leaning in on serving this aging population and the caregivers that support them, but doing so in a way that reframes the conversation. They focus on things like aging powerfully, active living. This, you could be forgiven for thinking that this is a fitness store that you walked into right off the bat. And as they try to change this conversation and elevate the conversation here, I'll certainly watch for learnings from this store being moved to other Shoppers Drug Marts. But the other piece I'm looking at here is actually the products in the store itself. Many of these products have real opportunity to elevate that flown position, that connection that they're able to create and that branding around it. And the question I'm watching is it going to be national brands or private label brands that lead that conversation, that elevate these products even further? I think there's certainly opportunity there as well. Okay, and this leads us into the fifth area, this idea of more points of distribution. I think we've all seen the various array of banners that are elevating their pharmacy and pharmacy services. It feels like everyone from Costco to No Frills is emphasizing the role that their pharmacist is playing, which is great. But in addition to having more points of distribution, we're also seeing more consolidation happen in the market, with the Jean Coutu and Metro merger, or acquisition, I should say, being the latest example of this. So elevating Metro's ability to play in that beauty and health space. But this is only one element of this conversation. There's the other element as well, of new points of access that go beyond our physical walls. An example of this is the kiosks that we're seeing CVS test, both in the East Coast, at university campuses and transport hubs. Places they couldn't fit a drugstore before, well, they're now fitting this. And it holds 70 SKUs, including some beauty items and OTC items. But in addition to kiosks, we're seeing folks actually look even further, thinking beyond the box and beyond the traditional physical realm, looking at services as well. So one example of this that I'm watching for very closely is the use of telehealth. I can already talk online to a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist and find out about the side effects of my medication or get a prescription refill, for instance. But why can't I do more here? Could this be actually branded through a pharmacist and I could get the whole solution just ordered right here in this chat or in this type of conversation? That's something I'm watching very closely, and I do think it's going to be the next step. The other piece, in addition to telehealth, is also just the new types of digital services that are coming online. Think, for instance, Uber and the partnership with Cargo that is starting to roll out. So Uber is effectively installing these kiosks here, this console in the car, so it becomes a roaming C-store for passengers. And as I think about this, and as you look at just the array of digital services that are coming out, everything from things like Uber to Airbnb, it's what would be the role of the pharmacy as well, of on-the-go beauty, of on-the-go health. I think this idea, as we look at more points of access or more points for convenience, we have to think beyond the box. I think we're going to see more connections with services and services partnerships evolve even more over time as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to close this and give us just some 5 key considerations as we kind of move forward and wrap up the landscape of where we're at and also the direction where we see it headed with some of the considerations for today. So the first one, the idea of self-care and conversion. How well are we leaning into events to drive traffic to our stores and using events that truly activate the store and then elevate it? Okay, in addition to elevating events, how are we leveraging digital in a more holistic sense to help improve outcomes, to help enable self-care, whether this is through fulfillment or various media and marketing tie-ins as well, in addition to the health digital tools that we've been hearing quite a bit about. Then number 3, when we think of the loyalty and the authenticity and transparency around it, I would argue we should be leveraging a wider set of data. Understanding how we're viewed on social media, in addition to talking to our pharmacists and our patients, and asking, what is it do they see that we stand for? And recognizing what we stand for and truly starting to lean into that, using that as our point of customer connection, and considering how that connects across the box. And then number 4, when we think of innovation, when we think of products, are we really elevating and over-investing in those brands and in those types of products that help empower shoppers, to live those lifestyles that they want, and also help us drive that unique connection with them, and why they would go to us in the first place. And then the last piece here, this idea of convenience and expanding points of access. Yes, this is certainly an opportunity for us to expand our points of access as well, but we also have to recognize that this will mean increased competition from various outlets or various places. And so as it becomes this slightly more fragmented environment, is we have to remind ourselves to assert both our specialized expertise that we offer as pharmacists, but also the front-end solutions that we're able to provide by having this holistic offer, and making sure that we elevate this as our point of differentiation as we move forward in the market today. Because it's certainly changing very quickly, and I wouldn't want anyone in this room to get caught flat-footed. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Great job. That was great insights. If I could compress the entire conversation, we're moving from this sort of transactional world to a transformative one. Yet when I look out in the world, I see most of that happening where that wasn't their core business. Airbnb, Uber, Amazon. What do we have to do as an industry to make sure we're not Ubered? That this world that's happening where consumers demanding things with an arm's reach of desire isn't delivered by someone else?
Yeah, and talking about the digital disruption and what I'll call it the new places of competition, I think that's kind of the piece that I closed on of don't get caught flat-footed. I think sometimes folks tend to focus on their traditional competitors or their traditional view of the industry they're in or the silo that they're in. And they miss seeing the emerging bubbles that are coming up, the emerging areas that aren't an issue until they become an issue. So I think looking laterally and thinking a little bit more holistically about competitors, about how practices can be done, is the first step to making sure that we don't get upended and instead that we're in front of the shifts that you're seeing.
But we're talking about stores and people and talent and shelves and everything else that goes with it. So saying not to get flat-footed is one thing, but what do where can you point us to success in the States at saying our expertise in currency, for example, as a pharmacist, is a countering force to the sense that my phone's a vending machine?
Of course. So to build on Robin's point, but to kind of frame it a little bit differently, what's happening in the United States right now is that we're moving into more of a specialty environment right now. So if you think about like a Best Buy, for instance, or a Home Depot or a Lowe's, the reason why that trip mission is protected in the world of Amazon is that it serves a very specific purpose and is very loud and authentic to the consumer. So they know exactly the promise as well as the delivery is being met. So in this environment, where we're about is health. I think when we think about our core equity, it's about delivering healthcare and the evidence and the process to be able to do that. So we need to play to our strengths, and service is a big part of that. So when we think about services, being that front door of health is increasingly important in the retail environment. In an environment where there's less healthcare professionals, people are looking for someplace to trust.
So devil's advocate here, because you had a great slide up earlier where you used the difference between health and wellness.
Yep.
Health is when something's happened to me and I need to get healthy.
Correct.
Wellness is I'm taking some preventative steps.
Right.
In Canada, that could be the running room. That could be my Fitbit. That could be other pieces of technology. How do we make sure we're also in the wellness business so that people feel that their path in life is something where we're their Yoda versus just somewhere they go at the end when they 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning, they're going to say whoever can get me the drugs cheapest and fastest wins.
You want me to start this one?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So good question. I agree, and I also say beauty is going to be a big part of that, as well as entertainment. So the whole point of that health and wellness slide is to highlight the delineation in terms of the shopper's attitude. So meeting them where they're at is important, and I think the association of health has to change. Being it prescribed, dictated, here's a pill, here's a molecule, we're gonna focus on that being brand first. In an environment where the shopper is looking to be engaged differently and empowered, our communication and our marketing has to change. So I think beauty is always first and always ahead in terms of a product in the category within the box. So seeing that innovation in the messaging in terms of a lot of these other companies are doing well, or L'Oreal, I mean, because you're thinking some of the beauty companies, especially the prestige beauty companies, they get it. The product has to serve multiple purposes. It has to serve both an emotional as well as a functional purpose. That's the expectation is now resonating across the whole box right now. So either the retailer or the brand needs to get with the program, or store brand's going to fill in that spot.
So just to build on that, because there's nothing that's going to say that the beauty brands can't start going direct and saying,
Well, they are.
Yeah, we'll do diagnostics with your skin, we'll do your hair, we'll create the perfect person. You know, you talk about personalization, another great point. We're not just going to give us our own brand, we're going to give you your shampoo.
Exactly.
So once again, I keep coming back and I'm pushing it. I'm not expecting all the answers today, but the role of the pharmacist, the trust, the credibility, the currency, are you seeing things where that can be elevated to people go, if I'm going to go, there's so many doors open, at least that door when I walk in, there's peace of mind or there's sense of relationship? What is it that's sort of creating some stickiness down in the States?
Well, I mean, I think in the States, grocery still is, when you think about pharmacy satisfaction scores, so any of the benchmarking in terms of satisfaction, in terms of that local experience, grocery, when folks are in there once a week, that interaction, that continuity, that relationship. So the old way of doing things, there's still goodness in that in terms of building a relationship with an individual who's sort of that, that person, that pressure test. So in terms of a best practice, local pharmacists, whether it's Health Mart and some of the local pharmacies, are really doing a good job of maintaining the integrity of that experience, while other, obviously Walmart, the bigger boxes are scaling. So it's a hard balancing act, right? And I think telehealth gives us an opportunity to do that. So bringing more of that technology into the store is going to unlock that pharmacist to be able to do what they're supposed to do, which is actually keep people well and empower people to stay well.
Okay. Robin, final question before we bring the rest of the panel up.
Yeah.
You offered 5 really interesting takeaways. I've now made you CEO of an organization. Which is the first one you would bet on in terms of creating that sense of sustainable relationship with the consumer?
Yeah, and I think if we're looking long term here, I think it's that notion of loyalty. So that having that sense of transparency and authenticity, I think that is needed to have that trust to cascade to some of the other elements, whether it's more access points or more partnerships or more types of marketing that you can do.
Do you think loyalty is just more, are you talking about points as the currency, or is it more about an emotional connection with the retailer, or a combination of the two?
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification. I didn't mean loyalty in terms of loyalty points.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people confound that of loyalty as a card. And it's, no, that card is a habit, and that shopper has 20 of those cards in their wallet. It's more this idea of having them feel a connection to you, a trust to you. Why would I go to you for advice versus someone else? I think that is important, because that's that's how you avoid commodification. And I think in a digital world, it's very easy to commodify everything. To your point of, it doesn't matter who brings it to me, whatever Uber gets there faster or what have you. I think that's a real risk. So this idea of how am I driving this connection, standing for something that shoppers believe, believe me when I say it, that's the starting point for all the other ones.
You're going to stick around for the panel?
Yes, we're here.
First of all, I think they deserve incredible round. That's a fabulous presentation today. We're now going to ask 3 operators to come to the stage. Helen Hughes coming in. She's president. And she's doing a lot of work in the senior home care area. She's moved out of the pharmacy world, so she's going to give us her insights in terms of the people that are at home, what they're looking for, what are they thinking, feeling, behaving. Modesty Kulkarni's coming in. She's a strategist with Rexall, and talking to her earlier, she's She's got a lot of passion for the kind of the next moves on the chessboard. Jim Johnson, please come up, Vice President of Operations, I think for the last year with Rexall. So big round of applause for our panelists. Take your seats, good stuff.
Might as well.
So I thought that was a great way to set the stage for the operators, because you're sitting there and there's 15 different things that are coming at you. Some of them are going to be desirable, most of them are desirable, some are not going to be that feasible because every business is different. So the first thing I want to do is we break this panel in. I want to kind of talk current and then that desired future state. What are the big bets to be made? And I'm going to use Cantor just as a countering point. It's a good brand name for it. So I want to start with, if you've ever watched Apollo 13 where the spaceships fly, and Kranz says, what do we have on the spaceship that's good? Right? So the first thing is you start looking at pharmacy today in Canada. If you had to pick the key strength, the card that you can play on the table, that you could bet a business on, what would that be? I'll start with you, Jim.
Well, I think one of the things that resonated with me was the piece around convenience and accessibility, and that's really a big part of it. We're everywhere. There's pharmacies in most small towns, in most cities, on most corners, in most neighborhoods, and so I think that is a piece of it, that trust and that access and the ability to connect with people, that piece is there.
So I'm going to go back and forth, so I'll take it over to here. So convenience used to be, I see you in my corner when I drive home. I know where the lights are. Oh yeah, I know where it is when I'm out. Convenience now seems to be my phone and a vending machine. So how do we ensure convenience still says, got to get up, got to get in my car, drive to the store or order online, but how do we know that convenience can still exist within the bricks and mortar world?
I think it's an expanded notion of convenience. I think the risk that drugstores could have is becoming the cereal of convenience. The idea of what was convenience, several years ago is getting upended by new offerings. The Prime Now being a prime example of that. So I think bricks and mortar certainly has a role to play because there's so many physical access points. But how do I leverage those access points through new medium? So through those, on-demand delivery providers or fulfilling kiosks or what have you.
So watch your flank and make sure you have those things available, but still play to your strength.
One thing I want to reemphasize to everyone in this room, brick and mortar is not dead. So I want to make sure that's clear. Our forecast, 83% of all sales by 2022 is still happening in the physical store. So I want to make sure everyone here is deep breath because people are still coming into stores looking for solutions. And frankly, with the distance, thank you for that. I usually get that. It's important to understand that because as telehealth becomes a thing, accessibility has a lot of different, it's really about evolving shopper demands. And we need to think about it that way versus online versus offline.
So Modesty, as a strategist within your corporation, obviously, people come to you and go, where do we invest? Where do we divest? The Michael Porter competitive model. When you listen to everything that's happening within your world, what would you say is something that we can always count on, or we certainly can count on for the next decade?
Well, I don't think you can ever rest on your laurels and not continue to invest in strengths, but I think one of the areas that pharmacy in general has a lot of strength in, and I know it's something that we take really seriously, and don't want to take it for granted, is that trust. And Rana alluded to it earlier in terms of the trust that patients have in their pharmacist, and I think that that's something we really need to leverage and not take for granted, because trust allows you to get into a lot of different spaces, and it gives you a base of credibility on which to build, and it will, I think, allow us to move into some of the areas we're talking about. And I think that trust that the public and patients have in pharmacy, and then in particular with their pharmacist, is really going to be critical going forward.
So, but trust is that intangible. It's empathy, it's generosity, it's listening. How do we continue to wrap a ribbon around it so people value it as opposed to take it for granted? Right, so it's like you're right, because the new generation might be trusting their Google search more or their social network more than they'll trust. So how do we emphasize that? What do we do? Is it thought leadership? What are some of the programs that we could be thinking about to people go, boy, when I want to get the right answers, when I want to walk away feeling good about the knowledge I've been giving, it's my neighborhood pharmacy. Is there anything that we can be thinking about that way?
I think it's having the patient's best interests at heart, right? And focusing on the patient and what their needs are and what's going to help them achieve their goals. I think one thing that Robin spoke to that really resonated with me is the authenticity and the need for transparency, and I think that has a lot to do with continuing to build on that trust. So I think, you know, being very open with our patients, our consumers, being able to, you know, demonstrate how we add value, but in a very authentic way, I think that will continue to build trust. And I think a lot of times, particularly with younger consumers and newer generations, there will need to be proof points for them. So they will need to have that moment of truth in the pharmacy interacting with their pharmacist to understand what that relationship can look like.
So Helen, in MediSystem, you went from the pharmaceutical world, now you're very focused on home care,
Yes.
right? So you must be getting a lot of insights in how people feel trying to navigate the healthcare system, but their base is their home. How do they view the pharmacy? How do they see that role within the entire, you know, set of solutions they could be going after?
Well, in home care and also in nursing homes and retirement homes, where a lot of seniors are spending their golden years and relying on the pharmacy to help them with their care, we're finding that pharmacy is not just, and I don't want to say just, and I'm a pharmacist, so we're not just drug pushers or dispensers and counters and pourers. They see us as an overall holistic solution. And as there are more seniors and baby boomers are getting older and older, there's a sandwich generation happening where even children, you know, sons, daughters, daughter-in-laws, they're all expecting more of a holistic care for their parents and their loved ones. And even the seniors that are living in nursing homes, retirement homes, and aging in their own home, they expect pharmacy and pharmacists to be more than just providing of medications. They want us to lean in and do more of the proactive partnering and assistance that a pharmacy can give as opposed to reactive. So reactive means you give help or advice or counsel if you're asked. You know, the way that home care and nursing and retirement homes are evolving and the way seniors and patients out there who are aging are looking for things is they want a very proactive pharmacist service and partnership as opposed to reactive.
So as we start building our conversation towards the future, I want us to just take a pause for now and go, where do we think we're the most vulnerable as an industry? Given kind of the bar that was set earlier, things like trust, investing more time, making sure we maintain convenience, where's the areas that we have to watch and make sure that we never let go, because that's where we'll be vulnerable. Does that make sense? So in other words, if I was in the hotel industry, I'd say I never would have imagined that somebody would go to a site and check my prices compared to other hotels, right? So if I was in the taxi industry, I never imagined somebody would have put something on that they don't even own their own drivers, and they found a way to disrupt me. So is there any area that you think, you're in charge of operations now, you've had the rudder for a year, what are you really working on to make sure that we stay solid in the customer's mind?
I think part of it is, as we look at our reimbursement model right now being very much focused on distribution of drugs, the supply chain, and trying to move to that professional value, the services that come with it. And that, I think there's a lot of the pharmacists, and I'm a pharmacist myself, so I'll speak for that group, is that I think we get stuck in that. And how do we remove ourselves from that supply chain when that is our reimbursement model? And so trying to add that value back given the model we have is the tricky part, I think, and that's where we are vulnerable if we stay focused on that. So we have to find ways to add the value given the model we have today.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's similar, but building on that, I think it's an industry that's ripe for disruption. We've seen that in terms of the trends. If you look at the way in which a prescription is dispensed today versus 20 years ago, there's efficiencies, there's been changes in workflow. It really hasn't, by and large, changed that much. So there's definitely the potential for different players to come in and change that up. I think for us, it's about figuring out how we continue to make the physical asset relevant and drive that traffic and create a service model that still has relevance and adds value for the patients. So bringing together, potentially additional services in addition to pharmacy, and repositioning pharmacy, and Helen spoke to it a little bit, from just a medication management or a medication expert to repositioning pharmacists and pharmacy is a bigger part of healthcare provision and delivery of care. And so that can be.
So how do you monetize that? How do you find, because that's a major investment. It's great, purposeful, rewarding, but it's a major investment in time and effort versus just simply the transaction. How do we find, and I'll take it to the whole panel, how do we carve out that opportunity knowing that we're probably going to be, we're going to have to find a way to do it in a profitable way, but in a way that kind of meets that generation of consumers that are demanding a level of excellence?
I want to go back real quickly. You asked a question in terms of a threat. I keep on, when you said that, Valiant Pharmaceuticals just jumped out into my head in terms of the pricing perception and the pricing pressure issue, because it started here and then it went to the US with Walgreens taking a lot of that inventory and frankly selling it at a lower price in the US and saving sort of the stock price of that company. So there is an output. So if there is a perception, especially in this country, I think that matters even more in terms of the heightened awareness of the value that you're getting. And if you're trying to work a system and be profit focused, the consumer is now knowledgeable and has technology to figure that out. And you will suffer the repercussions from a stockholder standpoint. So I think it keeps people honest. But to the other point that we were talking about relative to, we think about technology and all the things we're talking about in the evolving, Amazon, voice, all this technology still has generic responses. So in terms of the integrity of our model and whatnot, if you're not delivering an outcome, people will always come back into the store to ask a trusted professional. So the folks who are going to school, doing all that work, there is credibility in there and there is currency in there, because when technology does fall short, the individual still comes back in the store and asks for help. So I don't want us to all think that that's not the case. There's a lot of commotion going on, but what we do is still very, very important, especially when we think about specialty conditions and chronic care. That's all people are looking for. They're not trusting in a device to tell them what the truth. They're going into the store or to a nurse or some healthcare professional to help guide them through that process.
So Helen, you talked about, and I think there's a common theme that's happening about the empathy and listening and stuff. Do they feel they're getting that from the pharmacists? Is that a skill we're teaching in university? Are we teaching that sense of self-awareness, communication, collaboration? Or
I believe we are. I am seeing great progress and movement in the right direction, that universities, schools of pharmacy are focusing on that aspect of how to make sure pharmacists are coming across, if not already naturally, in a manner that patients and customers are feeling that sense of connection with the pharmacist. I think that naturally, pharmacists in general are very nurturing and caring, and we all went into this profession to help people, make them feel better. And I think that's just a natural sort of relationship. Everybody mentions it. I mean, even Honorable Rana Ambrose said things about trust and that partnership between the patient and the pharmacist. I think we're heading in the right direction, that even though it was already something in place, we're not letting go of it. And we're making sure newer pharmacists joining the profession are focused on that and wanting to engage with customers and patients and do the full pharmaceutical trust and partnership with them.
So Modesty, we heard earlier about events and things that are happening in stores to bring people in and get them on a much more preventative program, wellness versus health. That takes a unique skill, though. I mean, you can bring people in, but if I'm a Netflix generation. I'm expecting some kind of engagement and entertainment. Do you find that within your organization, your talent strategies are changing because of what you think is going to be the new role? And is that going all the way through university? Are you integrating it within it?
Yeah, I think I think the talent strategies have to change. I do agree with Helen. I think by and large, and I'm not a pharmacist, but I've been in the industry for a number of years, and we make a lot of generalizations about pharmacists. But just like any occupation, you've got a range of diverse personalities. But I do believe pharmacists got into the industry to care for people and take care of people, and we see that in our stores. I think one of the challenges is there's a lot happening at retail, and the retail environment is very fast-paced, and so, we need to make sure we're simplifying the workflow and simplifying the operations to allow them to spend time caring for their patients, which is what they did. That being said, I think, the events that Robin described, there's going to be a certain level of talent that has a lot of comfort with that type of environment, and there's going to be some that are less comfortable, and I think that's where partnerships with other healthcare providers can potentially play a role, bringing nurses into stores or bringing other professionals to work alongside to help engage the patient in a different way. I think the pharmacist is a critical relationship, but we know in our stores, it doesn't have to be just the pharmacist. The pharmacy team is very important, and so maybe you need to leverage the strengths of some of the other team members as well.
I mean, Jim, I'll go to you because that is your brand. If you bring people in for an event or you bring the people in for education, and they walk away going, that was a waste of time, or I didn't learn anything, then that's your brand at stake. Where the past it was, my cash register worked well, my debit machine works well, my stores are well faced, pharmacist delivers the prescription. It's a whole new world now when you're becoming an impresario. So how do you get that sort of emotional side going? What kind of learnings can we all learn from in terms of bringing that to the table?
I think part of it is that we've heard it said, and is that you have to take care of each patient individually and do it well. I look at even something like a medication review, where some of them provide value to the patient, some of them don't. And I think I met with the new Associate Dean of the University of Alberta faculty, and we were talking about what do they need to have new graduates coming out with. And he was focused on how do we tell patients what we can do for them. And I don't think that's right. I think patients have to experience it. They need to experience the value and tell each other. And that's where it comes from, is if they can come in for an event, we tell them what their blood glucose score is, they can do that themselves. So there has to be more, it needs to be individual, and it needs to provide value to them.
Okay. As we're looking in the States and Canada in terms of overall, I remember the first time I found out I could get a flu shot at a pharmacy. I was shocked. I was like, well, what are they doing giving flu shots? And they have a doctor on call? So we're trying to move into this sense of doing much more. If you look at neighborhood pharmacies thing, they're talking about 17 million visits go from physicians into the drugstores. It's a big number. Where's the consumer's head, heart, and hands so they think and feel and behave towards it? Is that an easy gauntlet to get people to kind of move from one area to another, or is it going to take a lot of advertising and a lot of marketing to have people believe not only can we dispense a drug, but we can tell you what drug you need?
I mean, in the States, so I work a lot with immunizations, vaccine providers. There are a lot of challenges, cultural challenges, trust challenges, operational challenges. If you walk into a CVS store during flu shot season, you cannot walk down any aisle without seeing free flu shot, flu shot, flu shot, go, go, go. Because there is a responsibility, because it's available. Most health insurance plans cover it, so there's a motivation there from a financial standpoint. However, there's still barriers in terms of trust, and there's campaigns even locally that it doesn't work, it causes autism. There's a lot of, I don't want to say fake news, but there's a lot of news out there that folks are trying to weed through. However, it's something that people need, especially at this last year. The cold and flu season this year was just very severe. And so people are being rolled back in. That's why events in the States are working. I mean, Walmart breaks world records when they have their quarterly health and wellness events, and that's why they're doing more of it. So I think in terms of providing services, it's really trying to overcome that consumer perception that a lot of the GSKs, Bayers, Pfizer of the world are struggling with, and because the healthcare professional is doing their job, the doctors are doing their job, but the trust with the pharmacist, to your point, there's still a perception like you don't know what you're doing, this health tech doesn't know what they're doing, and in certain regulatory environments prevent that from happening. While in other regulatory environments, Uber can start giving you a flu shot.
So Robin, I'm going to build, because your digital expertise, there has been a lot recently on privacy, Who do I trust? What am I giving away? What do they really want that information for? When it comes to healthcare, it could affect my long-term insurance, my ability to travel. It could impact a lot of things. Can the pharmacy play a role in that peace of mind? Because that, again, is asking the consumer to kind of go, I've always seen the physician here, the pharmacist there. Now the pharmacist is coming in, trying to conduct a lot of that healthcare orchestra. Is digital an enabler of that or a disabler, given everything that's going on with?
An enabler or a disabler of the
Of
trust?
having the pharmacist be viewed as playing a central role in my health.
Yeah, I think I would view it as an enabler. This idea that you can have, even the diagnostic kiosks in the pharmacy, where it takes your blood pressure and it tells you some basic things. So that alone would expand, the role or the types of information you can get from a pharmacy. But I think, talking more broadly about some of the what I'll call wider telehealth services and things like this, this idea that you can get more access to information or professional advice that you would trust through a professional that could screen it for you. I think there's broader roles that it could play as well, I guess. So there's some of the immediate examples we already see in the store, but I think there's further opportunities, certainly.
Helen, what are you doing in the technology space? I mean, you've done some big breakthroughs in terms of comfort and how I live, whether it's in a nursing home, retirement home, or at home. Is technology starting to make its way into that generation, or are we still 10 or 15 years before someone comes in and says, I want to be?
Oh, it's definitely making its way into that generation and that demographics of residents and patients who are needing pharmaceutical care. You have to recognize that whether they're living in their own home or in a more of a retirement or nursing home, where they're living also is very regulated, and that in turn creates an environment where the pharmacy that's working with those residents living in those homes, we have to then support whatever it is and bring in technology to make things happen on their end, make them more efficient, make the nursing staff, the support staff at the homes more efficient and able to spend more time at the bedside. So technology has definitely made its way, and it's made its home in the homes for sure, yes.
So Montse, as I look at this sort of almost traveling like liquid across all these touch points, whether the patient wants to be at the center, what role do you think pharmacy is going to play in that in terms of my ability to take control of my own health? Like what kind of investment in technology should we be making that moves away from what you were saying earlier, Jim, with just in the sense of we're in the dispensing business, to kind of solidify our position?
Yeah, well, I think pharmacy is in a unique position to see a more holistic view of the patient than maybe any other individual healthcare practitioner in their circle. That's still limited. There's still limitations to what we see in some of the data we have access to, but I think to the extent that we can be that hub and see their holistic patient profile and then help them manage their health through technology. I think technology is one way, so it could be things like online patient profiles in its simplest form. It could be managing their medication across a number of pharmacies and seamless transition from one pharmacy to another. Like there's a number of different ways. So I think the pharmacy is in a unique role and in a unique place to play that role.
And how do you feel, in terms of where you're taking your business, technology, whether it's my Fitbit trackable tech, or looking at my blood sugar and anything? Do you see the pharmacist intersecting with the patient based on the data they're giving them? And so how?
I think there's a big opportunity. I know I look at the Walgreens app in the US, and they've invested a lot in their digital strategy and just the patient app. And I think that comes back to the convenience. I look at the technology as a way to make things more convenient. We hear about appointment-based care. Using the technology perhaps to make the dispensing side more efficient and to share information so that when they do meet with their pharmacist, it's more of a discussion, more looking at their care rather than the other stuff's been taken care of. We're already filling your medications for you because you requested it yourself. those types of things. So I think there's opportunity for the technology to make that side more efficient, to give better time with the pharmacist.
How do we make sure our personality is attached to it? So we're not just, voice recognition isn't just suddenly eliminated, that they know that thought leadership and authority, because it's one thing to have the technology, it's another thing to go, how is this enabling it? I'll go back to use the Yoda example. How do we make sure we're the Yoda as part of this, where we're finding a way into the patient's life that they go, when I get this data, I want to make sure this data goes to you versus anyone else, because I trust you're going to give me the right answers. You're going to put me on the right path. Anybody want to take that on?
I mean, I'll try that one. I mean, that's a lot in there. But I'll say that's what retail is. Retail is that trusted source where you go every single day to buy goods and items to help improve your life. So changing the perception of a pharmacy or a pill or as something that's not something that you're getting punished for doing something wrong, versus allowing, once we get to that phase, and I think it's going to happen just naturally, if folks are going there more for their health care and making connections between grocery, the pharmacy, healthcare products, all these things as one big ecosystem of maintaining themselves, it's really going to start with the individual. But retailers are already that trusted place. There's a lot of commotion, a lot of polarization going on in the world, but people still go to Walmart, still go into Shoppers Drug Mart to buy their products because they still trust what they're getting and they have a choice in that process. So healthcare has a ways to go. And I think we talked about it earlier. Like one of the education and healthcare, at least in the States, are the two behind everything else in terms of an industry. But once it becomes consumer driven, all this stuff will start working its way out, because the perception of the shopper in terms of the value they're getting, everyone's willing to spend money if they think they're getting good value from it. Right now, healthcare is like, I did something wrong, I have to take this pill as almost like a punishment. Once we can overcome that as like, wow, this pill is going to allow me as a 65 plus, audition, aging, fashion forward boomer to live another 25 years, game changes in terms of the whole environment that we're in right now.
Robin, are you seeing anything I'll give you a quick example. Is running room. You go in there and go, yeah, I'm thinking of running a marathon. No, you don't want to run a marathon. Next Tuesday, do you want to walk around a couple of blocks? We're starting a new group. You walk around a couple of blocks, and a week later, you're jogging 1 minute, and 3 weeks later, you're jogging the whole time, and then some people get to the 10K, but they bring you along. Mm-hmm. They really are nurturing. You really feel like they're passionate about running. Yeah. Are you seeing anything in the way that digital can create and replicate a lot of that we can bring into pharmacy? Is there anybody that's using technology to get people on a real fitness path or a real wellness path?
That's interesting. And I think that's actually a good example of how the physical store is so powerful as well. So yes, there's certainly digital support communities which have a role, and I wouldn't diminish that. But the other piece of it is things like what Lululemon has done. Mm-hmm. If you go to the store for your yoga workout or to start your running routine or things like that, I think pharmacists have that type of opportunity as well, of helping you learn your stretches or helping you, being that, what I'll call that focal point that can bring people together. So yes, I guess I'd say yes to both. I think the digital can certainly augment some of the support groups and helping network me with other parents that have kids with similar issues and I wouldn't meet them otherwise, kind of thing. But in addition to that, I think the physical element, particularly for the wellness aspects, is an opportunity that could be leveraged more.
Okay, I want to turn our attention a little bit to this concept of flown and the sense of this beautiful integrated holistic approach to healthcare, which is the nutrition I take in, my exercise, everything that's going with it. Is that the pharmacy of the future? Is that where you think ultimately loyalty will reside when somebody's done that, or do you think that's going to be a number of different entities providing that? Jim, you want to start with that? You can take a pass if you want. But.
Yeah, I'll pass first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think pharmacy definitely has to recognize that that's where the consumer's headed. I'm not sure if that's the role. I think there's an opportunity for pharmacy to play that role in bringing all of that together. That's one opportunity. I think people could also choose to be successful in focusing in certain aspects of health and really becoming specialists in that area. But I think regardless of which strategy you choose, I think there needs to be recognition that our customers are looking to live healthier lives, are trying to make simple choices to with the products they buy, with what they eat, with the cleaning products they use at home to make themselves healthier. And I think recognizing that that's what our patients are going through holistically, and that's what's on their mind, I think that's important, regardless of where you choose to play.
So Helen, if you could design the perfect pharmacy for your target audience, because they're all of this stuff and more as they're trying to extend their life, live with dignity, what would that pharmacy be? What would that store be like? Would it be where they could get their groceries? Would it be what cleaning products they should be using? Would it be tracking how much they keep mobile every day? Would all of that stuff play into an integrated solution, or do you think we're asking too much of pharmacists?
I think it's okay to ask too much, because then you strive for it. And to your question, what would be the ideal pharmacy for the demographics of older people, let's say, or people living in homes, aging, and in nursing homes? I do believe that they are moving in that direction, where they want it all. They want the pharmacy to have not only the technology and the one patient view, the things that e-health could bring, but also the convenience of all the things that just got described. Flan, the health and wellness, the baby boomers are really into things like that. And they don't separate. If they're going to have you serve their pharmaceutical and medication management needs, they would embrace and love the convenience of everything else that will holistically be brought along. So the ideal pharmacy that I see going forward, and where we are moving towards to service that demographics, is to provide them with everything that they could get piecemealed if they went to different pharmacies and different stores, but the convenience of it being provided by one provider. So one-stop shop.
And in your case, in this sense, you're thinking health management's the Trojan horse. If you own that position with a customer,
Oh, yes.
why shouldn't you own everything else? Right? So I'll come back to you on that, but I just want to go from, actually, go ahead. You ready? Go ahead.
Well, I think
I gave you a pass. I didn't give you I gave you a buy on this, so go ahead.
a part of me thinks, though, pharmacy are medication experts. That's where they're trained. That's who they are. And I don't know that asking pharmacists, and maybe the separation is between pharmacy and pharmacists, but to be everything is necessarily realistic. We have different healthcare providers with different specialties for reasons. I think that's where an opportunity for some of that innovation comes in terms of partnerships, whether it be through a partnership with dietitians, or maybe we've partnered with physiotherapy, or all kinds of different services. But I think there is still a role for specialization in a certain area. And if you start to dilute that down too much, I think you lose some of that.
So you're more of an inch wide and a mile deep, and just do that very well.
That's the future, though. So to answer the question from at least objectively from our point of view, it's kind of looking across the geography. I think if you look at other categories and how retail is evolving, I mentioned Best Buy, I mentioned home improvement. I believe healthcare is going to eventually get there, and the consumer is going to force us there. So right now we're throwing a lot of stuff at the wall just because we want to be about something, and I think the consumer's not quite there yet. I think while as a burden of health and the cost of health gets shifted to them, they're going to start telling you what they want in a more direct way. And it's harder right now when you think about younger people who aren't necessarily progressive and sick right now. So where everyone's going Google and Gaga over telehealth. However, in the future, I think we're going to have to pick a lane, and we can't be everything to everybody. I mean, one of the beauties of Amazon, it gives a virtual world where you can be anything to everybody, but the experience is very, very personal. In a brick and mortar world, I'm going to be about cancer care. I'm going to be about diabetes. I'm going to be about specific disease states. And if you actually go into a CVS and you walk down the OTC aisles, they're starting to do that within their communication in terms of focusing on the category in a disease state versus trying to be very generic in terms of the conversation with their shoppers. Frankly, that's the only way they're going to get it. The consumer, as a shopper, is looking for solutions. If you're not being very direct, that's why I think there's a lot of learnings. We do a lot of 101 for pharma companies in terms of how to operate in a more consumer world using food and more commodities, because frankly CPG has been there a lot longer, and in the commodity world you have to think differently about how to engage. Retailers who are specializing in health are going to have to do the same thing. Technology will be a component, but frankly you can't have all these mixed messages to a shopper because they can't absorb all of that. You got to be very specialized.
So Robin, you brought out you talked about the Badger sunscreen and innovation and products and probably taking a more of a premium private label component. How much do we have to fly fish that in terms of being very specific, very functional, value added versus just simply we built a pretty good shampoo and we're selling it for $1 less than national brands?
Yeah, I think the first piece of it, and this is just reiterating what Brian and some other folks said, but the idea that you have to stand for something. That's kind of the first piece. Is we can't do everything, so you got to pick your lanes or pick your battles, and then within that, it's what are we offering? And I think no one thinks of pharmacies or drugstores or this area as cheap. It's not the bargain basement. We're not mixing things in our basement. So if we're not going to be the cheapest, bargain barrel thing out there, we've got to have that value for money. So once we pick what we're standing for, we've got to have that message of saying, I'm giving you something that's worth this. So I do think it's both of those elements, I guess. So when you're thinking of private label, for instance, it is, yes, you could say I'm giving you value for money, you're giving you a good offer, but it's this idea of I'm standing for something and I'm delivering on that message.
So when I go to, when I look at retail in this country, and there's some I have to go to. I have to go to a pharmacy to get my prescriptions, and I see this incredible growth in treasure hunting retailer like Dollarama or Winners, specialty people like, I'll help you build a deck. Where's your shopping experience? If I was to say in terms of the pharmacy role, if you said, we're the ones that create what kind of experience? Is there a way you could just describe it as simple as a treasure hunt? Is it? Neither one of you are looking at me. Go ahead. No?
I think the treasure is where the pharmacist, it's not about products or anything like that. It's about that interaction and face time with the patient. And I know we touched on things like med review and medication management. I can't stress that enough. I think that's actually the holy grail, in that if you do the medication management, it shows that ultimately it's health outcomes that the patient's looking for. Mm-hmm. And it shows that things like that, which are the bread and butter of what pharmacists should be doing, that is the core of the treasure, in that if you do the medication management and med review with as many, if not all, patients as you can, then that brings out best health outcome, disease state management, and that trust between that patient and the pharmacist. And I think that is where even the use of the expanded scope of practice, those are the things that I think will bring back the motherhood of that trust and partnership between customers, patients, and the pharmacist, and bring the treasure.
And you mentioned the sandwich generation. Is this some kind of, is this management should be shared to an extended family or just kept within the pharmacist and the patient?
Oh, it should be definitely, I mean, the sandwich generations, as they're called, they expect and demand interaction with the pharmacist. You can try to avoid it, you shouldn't, but I think it's the people themselves who are approaching and wanting more interaction, so it definitely involves them.
Any other thoughts in your shopping experience? And
Yeah, I think, if Dollarama is about the treasure hunt, then I think pharmacy is about caring. And I think from our research with patients, we hear it. This is a really complex time in their lives. They're coming in sick, and more often than not, they're dealing with a chronic illness. And it's a time that can be confusing, and they may not be getting the answers. And we have this opportunity to be that point in their whole journey, to provide solutions and to offer support and advice. And I think that caring, that can't be replicated online, and that can't be replicated with Amazon. I think that's really what the pharmacy is about.
so just as, I just want to sort of say what I learned today, and I want to, just as my way of thanking you. First of all, I think Jim and Brian, you both came at pick your lane and do it very, very well, and decide what business are you in. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest and most complex decisions to make going forward for pharmacies. What lanes are we in? And I think that both of you kept putting back this patient-centric element of saying there ultimately will lead you to the right lane. Helen, I loved your treasure hunt, but this sense of, but also the Trojan horse to all of this is the relationship you have when it comes to my health, or my aging parents' health, or my daughter's health. And that's a covenant that I think every retailer in the world would dream of having. And they just don't have, because you can have all the treasure hunts you want at Winners and stuff, but when it comes to putting my baby down and that night going to sleep and knowing she's got the right medicine, or knowing my parents have got a chance. What I really appreciated from both of you in terms of the operations, because the world is changing. And we're dealing with a world where the holy grail of capitalism is faster, better, and cheaper. Faster identifying unmet needs, being better at putting them out the door and trying to take costs out because there's inherent pressure. But you both kept coming back to something that a machine will never have, which is a heart. And as Amazon can get as big as they want, and we can get as many different delivery systems, but ultimately, I think, especially when it comes to health, heart matters most. So a big round of applause for this wonderful panel.